"You worthless little piece of trash." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. His mother's voice cut through the air, raw, venomous, full of hatred. He recoiled as if the words were blades, each one designed to wound deeper than the last. She stood there, trembling with anger, her face contorted in disgust, and Lucas felt his heart splinter for the millionth time. This wasn't the first time she had spoken to him like this. It wasn't the first time she had called him worthless. But today the words seemed different. They seemed final. And this time they weren't just coming from a mother angry with her son. They were coming from a woman who had long ago given up on him. A woman who had, for as long as Lucas could remember, pushed him into the corner of her world, where he was nothing more than a burden to be ignored. His father was no better. Lucas had grown up in a home where love was a foreign language, and emotional wounds were inflicted as often as physical ones. But it wasn't until he turned 16 that things truly began to unravel. That was when the betrayal started, when the rejection was no longer subtle but cruelly blatant. That was when his own mother, the woman who should have protected him, had begun to turn away from him, choosing her new boyfriend over her only son. "How can you stand there looking at me like that?" she spat, her voice venomous. "You're just like him. Useless. A failure." The words cut Lucas deeper than anything she had ever said before. His hands trembled, his body going cold, as memories of abandonment and isolation flooded his mind. He had always tried to be good, to be better. But nothing was ever good enough. Nothing ever would be. His heart ached as he thought about his life, the years he had spent trying to earn her love, only to be rejected again and again. He had worked so hard, tried so many things, each one crumbling under the weight of her indifference. But this was different. This time it felt like it was the end. He could feel the walls closing in, suffocating him, pushing him to the brink. The last straw had been the affair. His mother, the woman who had promised to be his protector, had chosen another man. Not just any man, but the man who would forever be the reason for his suffering, the man who had turned her away from him. The man who would make her turn a blind eye to the damage he was causing. The man who would make her treat him like an inconvenience. And so, in the darkness of his room, Lucas had been forced to watch as everything he had known shattered into a million pieces. But today something was different. Today he was no longer the scared, hopeless boy who lived under her roof. Today he had made a decision. A decision to fight for himself. The cold, sterile air of the courtroom wrapped around Lucas as he stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of shuffling papers, the murmur of voices, the sharp, icy clink of the metal chair as he sat down, it all seemed to drown out as his world shrank to the figure sitting before him. The judge, a woman of stern countenance, observed him with quiet scrutiny. But Lucas didn't care. He was beyond caring about what they thought of him. He wasn't here to explain himself anymore. He wasn't here to beg for his mother's approval. He was here for justice. And even if they didn't understand him, even if they judged him, he would no longer shrink in fear. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the nails biting into his skin. His mother sat to the side, her eyes filled with disdain. He knew she didn't care. She had abandoned him long ago. "You've heard the testimonies," the judge spoke, her voice cool and impersonal. "And now we'll hear from the defendant." Lucas could barely hear the words. His mind was in turmoil. He was shaking, his thoughts racing, but he couldn't hold it back anymore. He stood, his voice trembling as he faced the judge. "You don't know me," he said, his voice shaking with an intensity he hadn't expected. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the hell she put me through. The years of humiliation, of being rejected, of being abandoned." The courtroom fell silent, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Lucas could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He took a deep breath and continued. "But you're all wrong. You've been told lies. The truth is she's not the mother I thought she was. She's never been my mother. And you know what? I don't need her anymore." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge's brow furrowed in confusion, her lips parting in disbelief. But Lucas wasn't done. "Because she," he gestured toward his mother, "isn't my mother. You are." The room went dead silent. The judge's eyes widened in shock. The air seemed to freeze as everyone held their breath, unsure of what to make of his words. "You're my mother," Lucas repeated, his voice calm but unwavering. "You're the one who gave me the strength to keep going even when I had nothing left. You're the one who made me believe I could survive no matter what she did to me. So yes, you are my mother. Not her." The judge's face turned pale, her expression shifting between disbelief and confusion. For a moment, the courtroom was suspended in time, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for her reaction. Lucas stood there, feeling the weight of his words. The judge, who had always been a figure of authority and power, now seemed small in comparison. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, Lucas didn't feel small. For the first time, he didn't feel insignificant. He wasn't just some broken boy who had been abandoned by his mother. No, he was something more. Something stronger. He had found his voice, and with it, he had found the strength to stand up and be heard. The judge blinked, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty. But there was none. Lucas was done hiding. "Why would you say something like that?" the judge finally managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly. She wasn't angry, she was shocked, confused, caught off guard. She had expected an outburst, a plea for sympathy. But this was something entirely different. "Because," Lucas answered, his voice steady, "she's not my mother. Not anymore. She never was. And you've shown me that I am worth something. I am more than the abuse, the rejection, the humiliation. You taught me that." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted as Lucas's words hung in the air, thick with the weight of revelation. The judge stood there, momentarily frozen, her mind grappling with the shock of what Lucas had just said. The audience was still, their eyes flickering between the two figures standing in the middle of the room, Lucas, whose defiance seemed to have shattered everything, and the judge, whose usually composed demeanor was now shattered. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas had expected disbelief, maybe even anger, but not this. The judge seemed to shrink before him, her previously authoritative posture faltering. She slowly lowered her gaze to the table in front of her, her hands gripping the edge, knuckles white. For a moment she didn't speak. Lucas's heart pounded, his chest tightening as he waited for her response. He couldn't take it anymore. He was tired of being rejected, tired of being the punchline to their cruelty. The years of suffering, of isolation, of self-doubt, it all collided in that moment. His mother, the woman who was supposed to love him, had failed him at every turn. And now, the woman standing in front of him, a stranger he had never seen before, was his last chance at something real. The judge took a shaky breath, then another. Her voice finally broke the silence, but it was soft, almost trembling. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The room leaned in closer, as though the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for her to continue. "You think you're the only one who's been hurt. But you're not." Lucas's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. What was she talking about? He wanted to ask, but the words stuck in his throat. His mind spun in a dizzying blur of emotions. His mother was sitting on the side, her arms folded, face locked in disdain, but her eyes, there was something in her eyes. Something that made him wonder, just for a second, if she wasn't the true villain in this story. The judge glanced at him, her gaze sharp but filled with something else now. Her eyes softened just the slightest, and it was enough to make Lucas feel a strange pang of sympathy. She wasn't angry. She wasn't dismissive. She was vulnerable. "You don't know the whole truth," the judge repeated, this time louder, firmer. "You don't know what she did to me too. What I've been through." A flicker of disbelief passed over Lucas's face. He shook his head slightly, unable to process what she was saying. How could she have been hurt too? She was the one in charge, the one who had the power. She had the final say, didn't she? How could she have possibly suffered in the way he had? His voice trembled with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "She was the one who left me. She was the one who abandoned me. I was her son. She turned her back on me." The judge's eyes glistened with the weight of unshed tears. "I know," she murmured, almost to herself, as if she were unraveling a hidden memory. "I watched it happen. I watched her walk away from you, and I watched the devastation in your eyes. But what you don't understand is that she was never the same after that. She wasn't the woman I knew. Not anymore." Lucas was frozen in place. What was she saying? His mind raced to connect the dots, but there were too many gaps. He felt as though he was drowning in the confusion. The judge looked over at Lucas's mother. A fleeting moment of sorrow crossed her face. "You think she chose him," the judge continued, "but you don't know the whole story. You don't know that she had already lost herself long before you came into the picture. I saw her unravel before my eyes, the same way she tore you apart." Lucas's confusion deepened. His chest tightened, his breath catching in his throat. He glanced at his mother, expecting some sign of recognition, some hint that she would speak up, but she remained silent. She seemed to sink deeper into her seat, her gaze averted, avoiding confrontation at all costs. You're not saying she did this on purpose?" Lucas's voice quivered with disbelief. "You're saying she's like me?" The judge's eyes closed briefly as though bracing for the weight of her own confession. When she opened them again, they were filled with a quiet kind of pain that Lucas had never expected to see from someone in her position. "She was my best friend, Lucas," she whispered. "My sister. She was everything to me. I never wanted to lose her. But when she chose him, she left me too. It wasn't just you who was abandoned. It wasn't just you who had to grow up feeling like the world was against you. I was the one who watched it happen from the sidelines." Lucas felt as though the ground beneath him had vanished. His hands trembled and the room seemed to close in on him. His head was spinning. He wanted to speak, to say something, but words seemed to escape him. "But I don't understand." The words came out barely above a whisper. "How could you be the one who suffered? She was my mother. She was supposed to protect me, not betray me." The judge nodded slowly, her face softening as she stepped toward him. I know it seems impossible to understand. But she was never just your mother. She was a woman in pain, Lucas. A woman who had been torn apart by her own choices. The truth is, she was running away from something much bigger than you." Lucas stood there, his heart racing, his mind in chaos. Was this really possible? Was it possible that his mother's actions were the result of something more than just cruelty? Could he find a way to forgive her? Or had the damage been too great? The judge stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You were both victims in this, Lucas. But you also have the power to change how it all ends. You don't have to carry this burden anymore. You don't have to be a prisoner of her mistakes. You have the strength to find your own way now." The weight of her words was heavy. They swirled around Lucas's mind like a storm. His heart ached, not just for the abandonment he had suffered, but for the woman who had somehow become more than just a distant stranger. The judge wasn't just some impartial figure to him anymore. She was someone who had seen his pain, someone who had carried the same scars, even though her battle had been hidden behind layers of authority. For the first time, Lucas didn't feel so alone. Maybe the path ahead wasn't so impossible. Maybe, just maybe, the key to healing wasn't just about confronting the betrayal, but understanding the forces that had shaped it. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. The courtroom felt suffocating, yet Lucas couldn't tear his gaze away from the judge, who now appeared less like a figure of authority and more like a wounded soul, just like him. The weight of the moment was crushing, and Lucas's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger, disbelief, and something that he didn't quite recognize yet, but that felt dangerously close to empathy. He turned to look at his mother. Her face was unreadable, but there was a certain stillness in her eyes, as if she had already given up on trying to explain herself. It made Lucas's stomach churn. He had spent so many years hating her, blaming her for everything: his pain, his isolation, his sense of abandonment. But now, with the judge's words hanging heavily in the air, he felt something stir deep inside him. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of understanding. And understanding, he realized, was the first step to healing. The judge stepped closer to him, her voice soft but firm. "Lucas, the past can never be undone. The wounds that have been inflicted upon you, upon both of you, they are real. But they don't have to define your future. You have the power to rewrite the story. To stop being a prisoner of the pain." Lucas swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was some way out of this endless cycle of suffering. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the people who had let him down, who had abandoned him without a second thought. The bitterness of that abandonment had taken root in his heart for so long that it was hard to imagine ever letting go. Yet, the judge's words lingered in his mind, like a distant echo of something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The road to healing. "I don't know how," Lucas muttered, his voice barely audible. His hands were trembling, his entire body on edge as if he was about to explode. He was fighting a battle within himself, torn between the anger that had festered inside him for years and the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, there was another way to live. The judge nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "No one knows how to heal until they begin to take those first steps. But you don't have to do it alone." Her words hit him like a slap to the face. Alone. That's how he had always felt. Alone in the world, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love him, left to figure everything out on his own. He had built walls around himself, fortress-like barriers that kept everyone out. He'd learned to survive in the chaos, but deep down he had always wondered if there was more. Wondered if there was a way to stop the endless cycle of pain and disappointment. For the first time he felt a tiny spark of something else. Something softer, something that whispered of possibilities he had long abandoned. "Come with me," the judge said, her voice commanding but gentle. I know someone who can help you. Someone who understands. Lucas felt a flicker of hope, not the shallow, fleeting hope that had come and gone in the past, but something more profound, something that reached deep into the core of his being. He was tired of running, tired of being angry all the time. Maybe it was time to take that first step. The world outside the courthouse was different somehow. The sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain, and the streets were slick with the aftermath of a recent storm. But it felt like a fresh start, a new beginning, even though Lucas wasn't sure where it would lead. The judge walked beside him, her stride purposeful, as though she knew exactly where they were going. Lucas followed, trying to ignore the uncertainty swirling in his chest. They arrived at a small, unassuming building tucked away on a quiet street. It wasn't much to look at, but there was something inviting about it. The soft glow of the windows, the faint hum of voices coming from inside. The judge led him through the door, and immediately, the warmth of the place wrapped around him like a blanket. There were people inside, scattered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. The space felt peaceful, serene even, in stark contrast to the chaos and tension of the courtroom. This is a place for healing, the judge explained quietly, her voice almost reverent. A sanctuary for those who have been broken by the world. People come here to find peace, to rebuild what has been lost. Lucas felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, even as the anxiety still gnawed at the edges of his mind. He didn't know what he was supposed to do here, or what he was supposed to expect. But something deep inside him told him this was different. This was not another moment of false hope. This was real. He followed the judge to a small, cozy room at the back of the building. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, and the soft glow of candles illuminated the space. A woman was sitting in a chair by the window, her back turned to them, but the moment she heard their footsteps, she turned around. Her face was calm, kind, with an expression that spoke of understanding, the kind of understanding that Lucas had never known in his life. Her eyes were gentle yet piercing, as if she could see through the walls he had built around himself. "This is Grace," the judge introduced, her voice low. "She's someone who can help you make sense of everything. She's been through her own pain and she's learned how to heal." Grace smiled warmly, standing up and offering Lucas a seat. "I know you're scared," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I know you've been hurt and I know you don't trust easily. But that's okay. Take your time. You don't have to have all the answers today." Lucas hesitated. He had spent so long running from his pain, so long avoiding the truth, that the idea of facing it head-on terrified him. But he also knew he couldn't keep living in this limbo, trapped in anger, in rejection, in self-doubt. He took a deep breath and sat down, ready to take that first step toward healing, toward understanding the pain that had shaped him. For the first time he felt the weight of his past slowly begin to loosen, just a little. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't happen overnight. But with every word spoken, every small revelation, Lucas felt a tiny crack in the wall he had built around his heart. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Outside, the rain began to fall, gentle at first, then heavier, as if the sky itself was cleansing the world below. And for the first time in years, Lucas felt the stirrings of something new, hope. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas continued his visits to Grace. Each session was different. Some were calm, others were filled with painful, raw truths he hadn't been ready to face before. Grace guided him with quiet patience, never pushing him further than he could handle, but always challenging him to dig deeper, to confront the pain that had defined his life for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the last light of day began to fade, Lucas found himself in the same small room at the back of the sanctuary. The walls seemed to close in around him as Grace sat across from him, her gaze unwavering. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. "You've made incredible progress, Lucas," she said softly, her voice like a balm to his weary soul. "You're learning to release the anger, the bitterness. You're learning to forgive yourself." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. Forgive himself. That was the hardest part. For so long he had carried the weight of his past, believing that he was the one who had failed, that somehow, it was his fault that everything had fallen apart. He hadn't realized just how tightly he had been holding on to that guilt until it started to slip away little by little. "But there's still one thing you haven't faced yet," Grace continued, her voice gentle but firm. "And that's the truth about your mother." The words stung, but Lucas didn't flinch. He had been avoiding that conversation, too scared to confront the woman who had abandoned him, who had caused him so much pain. But he knew that Grace was right. If he was going to truly heal, he had to face it. He had to let go of the past and stop letting it control his future. "I'm not ready," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of it. Grace reached out and placed a hand on his. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing. You've already come so far. Now it's time to face the hardest part. Lucas stared down at their joined hands, the warmth of her touch grounding him, giving him the strength he didn't know he had. He had spent so many years running from the truth, but maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face the woman who had hurt him the most. I'm ready, he said, the words coming out in a quiet breath. But I don't know how to forgive her. Grace smiled, a knowing smile. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the things she did. It's about freeing yourself from the hold that anger has on you. It's about reclaiming your peace. The next day, Lucas found himself back in the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. His mother was there, sitting in the same place she had been weeks ago, her eyes lowered as though avoiding his gaze. The judge was present too, standing by him, her presence a silent reassurance. It wasn't the confrontation he had expected. No shouting, no accusations. Just an overwhelming silence that spoke volumes. Lucas took a deep breath and stepped forward, his legs trembling. He could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him, but there was something different this time. Something that felt lighter. The anger, the resentment, the sense of abandonment, they were still there, but they didn't hold him captive like they once did. His mother's eyes lifted, and for the first time in years their gazes met. Her face was pale, her features drawn in an expression of sorrow, but Lucas couldn't bring himself to feel pity for her. He didn't need her to apologize. He didn't need her to explain herself. What he needed was closure. What he needed was to take back the power she had stolen from him all those years ago. You're my mother, he said, his voice steady despite the churning emotions inside him. But I'm not your victim anymore. There was a brief flicker of something in his mother's eyes, shame, regret, maybe even guilt. But it was too late. Lucas had already let go. He had already forgiven her in his own way, not because she deserved it, but because he deserved peace. He deserved the freedom that came with no longer carrying the burden of her betrayal. The judge nodded, her expression one of quiet approval. You've done it, Lucas, she whispered. You've freed yourself. But just as Lucas thought the moment was over, as if the universe was testing him one last time, his mother spoke. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. I was broken too. I just didn't know how to fix myself, or you. Lucas stared at her, his heart torn between the anger that still lingered and the compassion he had begun to cultivate. Her apology was not the key to his healing, but it was a part of the journey. It was a piece of the puzzle that he had been waiting for, even though he hadn't realized it. Maybe we were both broken, Lucas said softly, his voice quieter than before. But I'm fixing myself now. I'm not waiting for you to do it for me. And with that, something inside him shifted. The last pieces of his anger, his sorrow, his resentment, they fell away like a heavy weight lifted from his chest. He was free. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the city. For the first time in years, Lucas felt like he was breathing again. Like he could finally see the world for what it was, beautiful, flawed, and full of possibilities. He didn't need to know what the future held. He didn't need to have all the answers. All he needed was this moment, this sense of peace that was finally settling over him like a comforting blanket. Healing is not a destination. It's a journey. And today, Lucas had taken one of the most important steps of his life. As he walked away from the courthouse, Lucas felt lighter than he had in years. He wasn't the same person who had walked in. He was no longer defined by his past, by his pain, by his mother's rejection. He was free and the world was wide open. And with that newfound freedom came a quiet, powerful realization. He was not broken. He was whole.